The mysterious child haunting an old mansion. Sarah had always been drawn to the abandoned mansion on the edge of town. As a photographer, she was always on the lookout for new and interesting subjects to capture, and the old, decaying house was the perfect backdrop for her work. She had been exploring the mansion for a few hours, taking photos of the crumbling walls and peeling wallpaper, when she heard a faint sound coming from one of the rooms upstairs. It was a child's voice, soft and barely audible, but it was enough to send a shiver down Sarah's spine. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly made her way up the stairs, camera in hand. As she approached the room where the sound had come from, she heard it again, more clearly this time. It was a child crying, and it seemed to be coming from behind a closed door. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then reached out and turned the doorknob. The door creaked open, and she saw a small child sitting on the floor, his back against the wall. He was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and his hair was long and unkempt. Sarah took a step forward, and the child looked up at her. His eyes were large and brown, and he looked up at her with a mixture of fear and sadness. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked softly. The child didn't answer, but Sarah could see tears streaming down his face. She took a step closer, then another, until she was kneeling in front of him. "It's okay," she said, reaching out to touch his shoulder. "I'm here to help you." The child looked at her for a moment, then slowly reached out and took her hand. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she felt the child's cold, clammy skin. "What's your name?" Sarah asked gently. The child didn't answer, but instead pointed to a small locket that was hanging around his neck. Sarah reached out and carefully lifted the locket from the child's neck. She opened it up, and inside she found a faded photograph of a young boy and his mother. "Is this your mother?" Sarah asked softly. The child nodded, tears still streaming down his face. "Can you tell me what happened to her?" Sarah asked. The child didn't say anything, but instead, he pointed to the window. Sarah turned her head and saw that the curtains were blowing in the wind, revealing a large, gnarled tree just outside. As she looked at the tree, Sarah felt a sudden sense of foreboding. There was something about it that didn't feel right. It was as if it was watching her, waiting for her to make a move. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from downstairs, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She stood up, still holding the locket, and looked at the child. "Stay here," she said, then quickly made her way down the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, she saw that the front door was wide open. She cautiously made her way towards it, camera at the ready, but when she stepped outside, she saw that the world around her had changed. The sky was a deep shade of red, and the air was thick with a noxious, acrid smell. The ground was covered in a thick, black sludge, and the trees around her were twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like grasping hands. Sarah heard a faint whispering sound, and she turned around to see the child standing in the doorway, his eyes filled with fear. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, grabbing the child's hand and pulling him towards her. As they ran through the twisted, nightmarish landscape, Sarah felt a growing sense of dread in the pit of her stomach. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew that they needed to escape before it was too late. Finally, they came to a clearing, and Sarah saw a figure standing in the distance. It was a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothes, her long hair blowing in the wind. She seemed to be beckoning them forward, and Sarah felt a strange compulsion to follow her. As they approached the woman, Sarah saw that she was holding a small, wooden box. She held it out to Sarah, and Sarah took it, feeling a strange sense of familiarity. "Open it," the woman said softly. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then slowly lifted the lid. Inside, she saw a small, intricately carved figurine of a child. As she looked at the figurine, Sarah felt a sudden sense of understanding. She realized that the child she had found in the mansion was trapped, caught between the living and the dead. The woman in front of her was the child's mother, and the twisted, nightmare world they had been trapped in was the child's own personal hell. With a sudden burst of clarity, Sarah knew what she had to do. She closed the box, then turned to the child. "I'm going to set you free," she said softly, "but I need you to be brave and trust me." The child nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. Sarah took a deep breath and began to recite an ancient chant that she had learned during her travels as a paranormal investigator. The words flowed from her lips like a river, and she felt a strange energy building up around her. As she continued to chant, she felt a sudden pressure in her mind, as if something was trying to force its way inside. She gritted her teeth and pushed back with all her strength, refusing to let whatever it was take control. The world around them began to warp and twist, and Sarah felt herself being pulled into a vortex of darkness. She held onto the child's hand tightly, refusing to let go. Finally, the darkness began to fade, and Sarah found herself standing in the old mansion once again. The child was gone, but she knew that he was no longer trapped between worlds. She made her way back to the entrance hall, and as she opened the door, she saw that the sun had risen. The world outside was bathed in a warm, golden light, and the trees swayed gently in the breeze. Sarah stepped outside, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had saved the child. As she turned to leave, she heard a faint whispering sound behind her. She turned around, but saw nothing. And yet, she knew that something was watching her. She walked away, her heart pounding in her chest, knowing that she had just come face to face with something truly terrifying. Something that existed beyond the realm of human understanding. And she knew that it would always be watching, waiting for the next unsuspecting victim to stumble into its grasp.